Hello, Dan Toma is my name, and today we're going to talk about innovation thesis. Before we jump into today's topic, I want to take you over the agenda that we're going to cover. First of all, I'm going to introduce myself and why am I doing this session, right? What's my expertise? Followed by what is an innovation thesis and why is it important to have an innovation thesis in your company. In a follow-up session, we're going to discuss about how you can start creating the innovation thesis for your company or for your department. A bit about myself, I co-authored a book called The Corporate Startup. The book addresses innovation in large organizations. Co-authored the book with two other amazing individuals. All of us are experts in corporate innovation. Fortunate enough to had the opportunity to work with various large organizations around the world. Enough said about myself. Let's jump into the session. So, why is it important to have an innovation thesis and what is an innovation thesis? First of all, an innovation thesis basically sets the boundaries for what innovation needs to be in your organization. It sets the boundaries to how innovation should look like in your organization. Also, it offers the advantage of justifying why financially successful business units or departments need to contribute money to cost centers or to less financially successful units. In general, innovation departments are cost centers, right? Because the revenue that they generate is not going to be in the next quarter, but probably in 3, 5, or even longer than that, right? 3, 5 years later down the road. So the innovation thesis basically acts like a constitution saying, why should a profitable department take all the profit and invest it into something which is not profitable currently? Also, it basically defines where does innovation need to happen. It's not that innovation is something that only some people need to worry about, but for some people and for some departments, innovation might be higher on their agenda, whether for others it might be lower. Also, what's really interesting about the innovation thesis, it also shows or defines where should the company not invest, basically an antithesis. It's basically drawing a line in the sand and saying we are going to invest only in this type of technologies or only in this type of products. We're not going to invest in the other type. Basically, is focusing the efforts of the company on particular technologies or on particular markets instead of letting people run around thinking that everything is important. What's really interesting about the innovation thesis is that it should not be considered as set in stone. This is not a law. This can be broken. The innovation thesis can be broken, but it should be broken in a scientific way. Basically, with the innovation thesis, then you can set up a portfolio experiment. You can create an innovation thesis, and to prove it right or wrong, you can do a portfolio experiment. Basically, invest in one company and see if that thesis holds water or not, to see if that is a valid thesis or it needs to be changed. So don't be afraid after creating your thesis to change it, to alter it based on some input that you got through a portfolio entry experiment that you've done. To make things more tangible, I want to give you an example now. And I feel that this is the best example for what an innovation thesis is. This is President Kennedy addressing the US Senate at the beginning of the 1960s, saying that I believe that this nation should commit itself before the decade is out to launch a man on the moon and return it back safely. What this statement is, this is the innovation thesis for the American space program. This was the innovation thesis for NASA. President Kennedy didn't come and say exactly what NASA needs to do, that it needs to build a rocket, that it needs to be in 3, 5 stages, and there needs to be 3 astronauts, not 2 or 1. Basically, President Kennedy came and said that this is what NASA should aim for in terms of strategic goals. So, in some respect, this represented an innovation thesis for NASA. This represented an innovation ambition for the American space program. Putting a man on the moon, before the decade was over, and of course bring him back safely. In order to create an innovation thesis, you need to look not just at your current company's business model, but also at factors which are outside the business model of your company. And for that, you can use the past analysis. Basically, you're looking at political, economic, social, technological, economical, and legal factors. You look at industry forces. You look at key trends that affect your company or might affect your company in the coming years. You look at market forces, right? How is the market reacting? Are there any social trends you need to be aware of, or might threaten your company's existence in the future? And of course, macroeconomic forces are also something that you need to be aware of. So not just look at your current existing business model, but look at also at factors that are outside business model. Look at factors that have an influence, direct or indirect, on your existing business model. Also, another thing you need to be aware of before you start creating your innovation thesis is that you should no longer look at industry, but you should have a broader view and look at a thing called arena. So an industry, everybody knows what it stands for and how industry segmentation works and whatnot. But in arena, you're basically looking at more broader or more general way in which customers might interact with your product offering. Arena is basically a combination between offer and place. Is where does your product stay, or where does your customer interact with your product in his everyday life? Industry analysis is not giving you the full picture. It's just giving you a narrow understanding of your product and of your competitive landscape. Why do I say competitive landscape? Is that if you look at arenas, now you're no longer talking about a certain product, but you're talking about jobs to be done. And once you're talking about jobs to be done, you need to understand that it might happen that your product is actually competing with somebody who is outside of your industry. If we would look at, for example, how you set up your breakfast, you're going to realize that all of a sudden the company producing milk is competing with a company that's producing eggs or yogurt for that breakfast that you are going to take, right? If you would ask the egg producing company to list their competitors, they will probably say other egg producing companies, but they will most likely not think about the milk producing company as a competitor. But if they would have an arena view of their offering, they would understand that basically they are competing with somebody from outside their core industry. A good example for this is Procter and Gamble and Unilever in a wider context. But Procter and Gamble is looking at an arena called household, and it's part of their strategy not to necessarily strive to be number one in a particular industry, like for example toothpaste or deo or chemicals for cleaning the bathroom, but they are interested in percentage of products in your household that come from Procter and Gamble. So they have various brands under their umbrella, and they're interested in you as a household to have as many products from their lineup in your household, in the arena called household, as you can have, right? So they're not interested in number one in toothpaste, although that's interesting to have, but they're more interested in being number one in your household in terms of product that you put on your shelf, from deo to chemicals to even stuff that's in your fridge might come from Procter and Gamble. This gives you an understanding of why arena is important and how other companies are thinking about arenas. This was an oversimplified example, but the conversation can continue with other or more in-depth examples. Basically, after you created your innovation thesis, you need to end up with something similar to what venture capital company have, and it's called an investment thesis. In the same way in which your innovation thesis works for your innovation efforts within your corporation, in the same way the investment thesis works for um, venture capital companies. This is an example of the investment thesis of Union Square Ventures in New York. If you read through the investment thesis, then I can tell you that they've invested in companies like SoundCloud, DuckDuckGo, or Meetup.com. As you can see, the examples that I gave you of companies they've invested in fall into the into the investment thesis statement, right? So they've invested in large network of engaged users, Meetup.com or DuckDuckGo or SoundCloud, which are differentiated through user experience, right? And defensible through network effect. This is basically the 101 on innovation thesis. And in the follow-up session, we're going to look at how you can create your innovation thesis for your department and for your company. Thank you. Right, so we are back talking about how you can create an innovation thesis for your department, for your business unit. Before we jump into this, I want to clear something out. This is a question I often get when I talk about innovation thesis. A lot of people ask me, how many innovation theses does my company need? Do we need to have one? Do we need to have several? Does every team or every department needs to have one? My answer is, of course, it depends from company to company. You cannot say that there is a rule when it comes to innovation thesis. But in general, I encourage large organizations that have various business units in various industries, in various segments, to create an innovation thesis for each department. So depending on the size of your organization, you might need one innovation thesis or an overarching one, but you also might need individual innovation theses at department level. Right. So first thing you need to do is, for this session, we're going to use two of the templates that are attached. First one we're going to use is the one that's going to help us set the stage for your innovation thesis. So if you look at the first part of this first template, we need to first of all list out what is the business model or the current business model or business models your organization is using. Are you doing as a service business model? Are you doing one-time purchase? I know that we are overly simplifying, but you need to think about what are some elements of the business model. How does your core business model look like? After you're done with that, think about which products or which business models from within your company or which business units from your company are in decline. And not just now, but they have continuously been in decline over the past, I don't know, 12 months, 24 months, or even longer than that. So try to write down what is the business model that your company is using currently, or the most frequent one, and what are some products or business units that are in decline. Following that, we need to talk about emerging trends or future technologies or customer jobs. What I encourage you, if you use the templates printed out in an A0 format and you're using Sharpies and Post-it notes, I encourage you to create 3 columns for the box on the left, which is talking about trends. One column being future technologies, one column being markets, and one column being customer jobs. And the last column, or the first one, depending on how you want to look at it, can be emerging trends, which can encompass everything or can be miscellaneous stuff that doesn't fit in any of the previous categories. And after you're done with that, try to list out what are some of the key trends that you see increasing or coming along in the next 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years. In the same way, as you're thinking about trends, try to think about what are some threats and competitors, but also opportunities that might come along in 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years. Are your competitors still going to be the same ones as today, or are you going to compete against something else or someone else? Are you going to have the same opportunities in 3, 5, 10 years as you see today, or do you think technologies that are now nascent are going to become more mainstream and they are going to impact your opportunities, or they are probably going to also become threats for you? So think about what are the trends for the next 3, 5, and 10 years following the template. After you're done with that, think about how are you going to use innovation to benefit from these trends that you've previously identified? What are some emerging trends in the next 5 years, and how do you think you're going to benefit from that? How are you going to use innovation to benefit from those trends? Are you going to create new products? Are you going to go down the path of open innovation? Think about all the opportunities out there to put all these new trends that you've identified to good use, or to use to your interest. After you're done with that, think about the arena. So think about how an arena is changing, and how your company's or your business unit arena is changing in the next 3 years, 5 years, and 10 years. But also think about what are some arenas you don't want to enter. By no means, you're not interested in entering in those arenas, and try to mark those in the X box. As you can see, after the 10-year box, you have an X box. Try to mark that in the X box. What are some arenas that you will never go into, you're never interested in that? After you're done thinking with this, we can move on to the next step. And the next one is, what do you think the company is going to look like if you succeed? How do you think the company is going to look like in 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years if you succeed in implementing the innovations based on the trends you've identified? Do you think the company is still going to look the same, or do you think it will change? How will the company change? Feel free to brainstorm as many solutions as you can, but bear in mind that you have to do it from a short term, 3 years, all the way to a medium and long term, 5, specifically 10 years in the future. After you're done using this template, we can talk about the vision for the future. And this is where your innovation thesis is going to be created. The first template is going to serve as a basis for the second one. So in the first part, in the vision for the future, think about what is your industry and how will your industry change. Also think about the adjacent industries. What are some adjacent industries now, and do you think these adjacent industries are still going to be around in 3, 5, 10 years? Write down all the adjacent industries that you see today, but also write down some adjacent industries for the future. Also think about people, population, and demographics. Do you think this is going to impact your company and the existence of your company? Write down what are some key trends when it comes to population and demographics. Also think about customer jobs. Do you think the customer job is going to develop over time, or do you think it's going to stay constant, it's going to stay the same as it is today? Same thing goes for markets or technology. Write down all the technologies that you are currently using in deploying your business model, but also write down technologies that you are going to see in the future impacting your business model, either in a positive or a negative way. Also write some social aspects there. Social aspects are really important. So write down some of the social or key social aspects that you see that might affect your industry. For example, if you are in food processing, more and more people are eating less sugar. Do you think that is going to impact your company? How will that impact your company? Do you think your company needs to use that information as an opportunity for innovation, or is it a threat and innovation will help defend against that? Also think about some political factors. Do you think the political situation in your country or worldwide are going to affect your company's existence? What are some things that you might see appearing in the horizon in the future when it comes to political factors, and how will this impact your company's business model? After you're done with that, focus on the thesis itself. So we believe that our company can benefit from current trends by investing in. List out some of the things you think your company should invest in today to benefit your innovation effort. What are some arenas that you think your company should invest in today? Do you think that your company should continue investing in the current arena, or should explore different arenas or new arenas? What are some ideas that you think your company should be investing in, either resources or financially? But also look at what are some technologies that your company should invest in, right? What are some technologies that can benefit your company? Following, look at what are some markets that your company need to invest in. Does your company need to continue investing in the current markets? Or should the company invest in new markets that haven't yet been developed, but that they have a high chance of growing? Also, what are some business models that your company should invest in? Should your company continue investing in the same business models as you have today? Or is this something that's outdated and your company should be investing in something new? Also, what are some teams that your company should invest in? And by teams, I also mean, how does this team look like? Should it be a remote team? Should it be a local team? How do these teams look like? I'm not telling you to mention names of teams that your company should invest in, but in general, what type of teams they need to invest in. What type of teams and how do they look like in terms of the setup, in terms of what they do, in terms of technology that they use or skill levels that they have. Last but not least, at the very bottom, try to write down some things that your company should never invest in. Maybe that cryptocurrency wave is not something your company should be investing in or should look deeply into. Or on the opposite side, it might be one of the technologies and one of the markets that your company can benefit from. Self-driving vehicles, right? Is it something that your company, or autonomous drive, right? Is this something that your company should be investing in, or is this something that by no means your company should be investing in or should be aware of, right? So write down some of the things that people might feel attracted to invest in, but if you give it a thorough look and if you look at everything you've done so far in this template and in the previous one, it will totally not fit with your organization. This is basically the box that's basically putting together the innovation antithesis, right? It's basically saying these are the things that we are never going to invest in. After you're done with that, try to synthesize everything to one sentence or one paragraph defining what is innovation for your company or for your business unit. How does it look like? Try to get to that one paragraph similar to what President Kennedy said when he was addressing the U.S. Congress at the beginning of the 60s. Try to get to that one sentence that an investor might use when they create their investment thesis. Try to synthesize all your work in a couple of sentences or in one paragraph. Also, try to mention in one sentence or one paragraph things that your company should never invest in because it doesn't fit with your current business model and with the future trends that you see emerging. Thank you very much for doing this. Before we leave, I want to make you aware of a quote from a thinker that I have the utmost respect, Rita McGrath. She's a professor of management and innovation at Columbia University in New York, and she's also a prolific writer. She said that knowing when to stop doing what you're doing is equally important to knowing what to do. This basically goes back to the antithesis. This basically goes back to saying that there are some things we need to never touch in order to save up those resources for the things that are important for our future and for the growth of our company. Also remember that the innovation thesis is not a law, and you should treat your innovation strategy in general, in a broader context, your entire innovation strategy should be treated as an iterative process. You take one step, you create an experiment, you run it in the market, you have some realizations, and then you're basically continue developing your strategy. It's basically an iterative process. Lean startup practitioners are going to call it a build, measure, learn cycle. Other practitioners are going to call it something else, but basically the essence is the same. You have a hypothesis about the future of your company, you write it down as an innovation thesis, and then following that, you are going to create an experiment, portfolio entry experiment, and you are going to see if this holds water or not. So remember that strategy should be flexible, should not be rigid, and should always consider input from the market. Combine leadership vision with market learning. This is your key to success. Provide that leadership vision, but also be open and flexible to changing your strategy based on the input that you got from the market. Thank you very much. This was this session on innovation thesis. Best of luck.